For decades, the people of Burkina Faso were told a simple story. Wheat was not their crop. Bread came from elsewhere. The flour used in bakeries depended on ships, foreign markets, and imports arriving from beyond the country's borders. Many accepted this idea because it had been repeated for so long that it seemed like an unquestionable fact. Experts pointed to the climate, critics pointed to the lack of irrigation. Others argued that Burkina Faso should focus only on traditional crops and leave wheat production to countries with cooler temperatures and longer histories of cultivation. According to this logic, wheat would always remain something imported, something purchased, something produced by others. But today, a very different reality is emerging across the country. From Bagre to Banzon, and from Banfora to other agricultural zones, thousands of hectares of wheat are growing on land that many once considered unsuitable. Fields that did not exist a few years ago are now providing visible proof that old assumptions can be challenged. What makes this story remarkable is not only the wheat itself, it is the determination behind it. It is the decision to question decades of dependence and ask a simple but powerful question. What if Burkina Faso could produce more of what its people consume every day? In this video, we will explore how a nation that was once heavily dependent on imported wheat began building its own wheat industry, why this transformation matters far beyond agriculture, and how it has become a symbol of a broader movement toward self-reliance. If you enjoy stories about Africa's transformation and the changes taking place under Ibrahim Traore, make sure to subscribe and join us for more in-depth analysis. To understand why this development matters so much, we must first examine the problem that Burkina Faso has been facing for years. The dependence on imported wheat did not happen overnight. It developed over decades, as many people came to believe that Burkina Faso simply lacked the conditions needed to grow the crop successfully. The argument sounded reasonable. The country faces periods of drought. Irrigation infrastructure has historically been limited in many regions. Agricultural investments often focused on crops that were already familiar to local producers. As a result, wheat was often viewed as a foreign crop, rather than a national opportunity. The common assumption was that countries with cooler climates and long-established wheat industries would always have a natural advantage. For many years, few people seriously challenged that belief. Yet one important question remained unanswered. Had Burkina Faso truly proven that wheat could not grow on its soil? Or had the country simply never invested enough effort, resources, and experimentation to find out? This question became increasingly important as food imports continued to drain valuable financial resources. Every year, large amounts of money left the country to pay for wheat and flour products. At the same time, many rural communities were searching for new economic opportunities and additional sources of income. The greatest obstacle was not necessarily the climate or the technology. It was the mindset that had formed around the issue. When people hear for decades that something cannot be done, many eventually stop trying. The belief itself becomes a barrier. History shows that major transformations often begin when someone is willing to challenge accepted wisdom. Before the first wheat fields appeared on a large scale, Burkina Faso had to overcome a deeper challenge. It had to overcome doubt. Not only the doubt of outside observers, but also the doubt that had quietly settled into the national conversation. That is where a new vision began to emerge, one that would soon reshape the country's agricultural ambitions. The turning point came when Burkina Faso's leadership decided that dependence should no longer be accepted as inevitable. Instead of asking how to import more wheat, the country began asking how to produce more of it at home. This shift in thinking became one of the key elements of the agricultural transformation promoted under Captain Ibrahim Traore. At the center of this effort Was the Offensive Agropastorale 2023 to 2025 a national program designed to strengthen food production and move the country closer to food sovereignty? The objective was not limited to increasing harvests. It was about giving Burkina Faso greater control over its future by reducing vulnerability to external markets and supply chains. For years, fluctuations in global prices, transportation costs, and international crises affected the availability and affordability of basic food products across Africa. Burkina Faso was not immune to these pressures. The more the country relied on imported food, the more exposed it became to decisions made far beyond its borders. This reality encouraged a different approach. Rather than viewing wheat as a crop reserved for other nations, policymakers began treating it as a strategic opportunity. Experiments were launched. Farmers received support. Agricultural technicians became more involved in field operations. New production sites were identified and developed. What made this approach different was its determination to challenge long-standing assumptions. The goal was not to prove that Burkina Faso could instantly replace all imports. The goal was to demonstrate that dependence could be reduced and that local production could become part of the solution. For many supporters of the initiative, wheat became more than an agricultural product. It became a symbol of confidence. It represented the belief that African countries can expand their productive capacity when they invest in their own people, land, and knowledge. Soon, the results of these efforts would begin appearing across the country in a way that could no longer be ignored. The most powerful argument in favor of Burkina Faso's wheat initiative is not a speech, a policy document, or a political slogan. It is the fields themselves. Results have a way of changing minds faster than debates ever can. The first large-scale experiments demonstrated that wheat could grow successfully under the right conditions. What began as a relatively modest effort soon expanded into something much larger. Areas that had never been associated with wheat production started attracting attention as green fields emerged across different regions of the country. Within a remarkably short period, cultivated wheat acreage increased dramatically. What had been measured in a few hundred hectares grew into more than 1,500 hectares spread across multiple production zones. This expansion represented far more than an increase in cultivated land. It represented growing confidence among farmers, technicians, and policymakers. Bagre became one of the most visible symbols of this transformation. Other locations, such as Banzon and Banfora, also contributed to the growing momentum. As more producers witnessed successful harvests and healthy crop development, participation increased. Farmers who had once been hesitant began considering wheat as a realistic addition to their production systems. The significance of this growth extends beyond statistics. Every new hectare serves as evidence that earlier assumptions were incomplete. Every successful field weakens the argument that wheat production is impossible in Burkina Faso. Every harvest provides new knowledge that can be shared with future producers. This is why the expansion of wheat cultivation has attracted so much attention. The numbers tell an important story, but the visual reality tells an even stronger one. People can now visit production sites and see the results with their own eyes. For years, critics asked whether wheat could grow in Burkina Faso. Today, thousands of hectares are providing an answer that is difficult to dismiss. The debate is no longer centered on possibility. It is increasingly focused on how far this progress can go in the years ahead. Policies and production targets are important, but no agricultural transformation becomes real until ordinary people decide to participate. In Burkina Faso, the wheat initiative gained momentum because farmers began seeing results for themselves. One of the most frequently cited examples is that of producers who started with small experimental plots and later expanded their operations. After witnessing successful harvests, some farmers who initially planted only a fraction of a hectare decided to cultivate several hectares the following season. Their decisions were based not on promises, but on experience. Across different regions, producers discovered advantages that they had not expected. Some observed that wheat required less labor than certain other crops once the plants became established. Others noted that the crop could compete effectively against weeds during key stages of growth. These practical observations encouraged additional participation and reduced skepticism among neighboring farmers. The impact extended beyond the farm owners themselves. Wheat production created employment opportunities for young people seeking work in rural areas. Seasonal laborers found new sources of income during planting, irrigation, maintenance, and harvesting periods. Women also became increasingly involved in agricultural activities linked to the expanding production zones. For many families, the significance of these opportunities went beyond wages. Agricultural work provided training, experience, and exposure to new production techniques. Young workers who gained knowledge on larger farms could eventually apply those skills to their own land and future projects. Perhaps the most important change was psychological. Successful wheat fields demonstrated that local producers were capable of mastering a crop that many had previously considered beyond their reach. Confidence began spreading from one community to another. Every agricultural transformation has a human face. In Burkina Faso, the story of wheat is ultimately the story of farmers willing to experiment, workers willing to learn, and communities willing to believe that new possibilities can emerge from familiar soil. Their efforts have become an essential part of this national transformation. The success of Burkina Faso's wheat initiative did not happen by chance. Behind every expanding field stood a network of support designed to help producers overcome challenges that had previously limited large-scale cultivation. This support became one of the key reasons why wheat production moved from experimentation to expansion. Farmers received assistance in several forms. Agricultural authorities helped with land preparation, improved seeds, technical guidance, irrigation equipment, and access to essential inputs. Agricultural technicians worked closely with producers, providing advice on planting schedules, fertilizer application, water management, and crop maintenance. This practical support reduced risk and encouraged more farmers to participate. At the same time, efforts were launched to strengthen domestic seed production. This was a critical step. A country cannot claim full agricultural independence if it remains permanently dependent on imported seeds. By developing local seed production capacity, Burkina Faso began building the foundations of a more sustainable wheat sector that could support future expansion. Not everyone is convinced that wheat can become a major long-term crop in the country. Some critics argue that imports may remain cheaper in certain situations. Others question whether production can continue growing at the same pace. These concerns deserve consideration, but they do not invalidate the progress already achieved. The objective is not to isolate Burkina Faso from international trade. The objective is to create balance. Local production provides an additional source of supply, reduces vulnerability to external shocks, and strengthens national resilience during periods of uncertainty. Perhaps this is why the wheat story is attracting attention beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Other African nations face similar challenges involving food imports, foreign dependency, and fluctuating global markets. The lesson is not that every country should copy the exact same model. The lesson is that countries should be willing to explore their own potential instead of accepting limitations that have never been fully tested. In that sense, the wheat fields of Burkina Faso represent something larger than agriculture. They represent a growing belief that African solutions can emerge from African experience, African innovation, and African determination. What began as an idea that many considered unrealistic has evolved into one of the most discussed agricultural developments in Burkina Faso. The story of wheat is no longer about whether the crop can grow. The evidence already exists in the fields, in the harvests, and in the growing number of producers who have chosen to participate. More than 1,500 hectares of wheat represent far more than cultivated land. They represent a shift in thinking. They represent the willingness of a nation to question long-standing assumptions and explore opportunities that were once dismissed. They represent confidence, experimentation, and the determination to reduce dependence through practical action. The journey is far from complete. Burkina Faso still imports significant quantities of wheat, and many challenges remain ahead. Yet progress rarely begins with perfection. It begins with the decision to move in a new direction and the courage to continue despite uncertainty. For many observers across the continent, this initiative has become a powerful example of Pan-African ambition in action. It reflects the vision of a stronger Burkina Faso, contributes to conversations within the African Union, and reinforces the ideals of Pan-Africanism that encourage African nations to develop their own solutions. Supporters often point to Captain Ibrahim Traore as symbols of this drive toward greater self-reliance and a new chapter for Africa new. If Burkina Faso can challenge assumptions that seemed permanent, perhaps other nations can do the same. If you believe Africa can build more of its own future, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and join the conversation. Have you noticed something unusual about the case of Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo? Across Burkina Faso, discussions continue to grow around the influential Sunni preacher. Yet, one question keeps attracting attention. If the authorities intended to impose a severe punishment, why has there been no final public announcement explaining exactly what will happen next? This question has encouraged many observers to look beyond the headlines. Some believe the government is sending a message about national unity. Others believe the situation may eventually lead to a more conciliatory outcome. In this video, we will examine the facts surrounding the case, the reactions it has generated, and the signs that have led some people to wonder whether Imam Kindo could regain his freedom in the future. We will also explore the role of President Ibrahim Traore, the importance of social cohesion, and why this issue has become a national conversation rather than simply a legal matter. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing community for more analysis on Burkina Faso and the major developments shaping Africa today. To understand the current debate, we must first look at what happened. Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo is one of the best-known Sunni religious figures in Burkina Faso. His sermons have reached large audiences, giving him significant influence within parts of the Muslim community. The controversy began after a series of statements connected to religious coexistence and national unity. Critics argued that some of his remarks could deepen divisions at a time when Burkina Faso faces serious security challenges. Supporters, however, viewed his comments as expressions of religious conviction. As public debate intensified, the authorities intervened, leading to his detention. What followed was not merely a discussion about one preacher. The case quickly evolved into a broader national debate involving religion, security, social harmony, and the future stability of Burkina Faso. One of the most interesting aspects of the Imam Kindo case is not what has happened, but what has not happened. Since the detention of the influential preacher, many people expected a rapid escalation. Some anticipated official accusations, public condemnations, or a highly visible legal process. Yet, the situation has unfolded differently. Up to now, there has been no widely publicized final decision explaining the long-term outcome of the case. This absence of a clear conclusion has encouraged speculation across Burkina Faso and beyond. For some observers, this may suggest that the authorities are approaching the matter with caution. Rather than turning the case into a public confrontation, the government appears focused on maintaining stability while evaluating the broader implications of the controversy. Another detail attracting attention is the lack of an aggressive campaign targeting Imam Kindo personally. In many politically sensitive cases around the world, governments often use public messaging to justify harsh measures. In this situation, however, the emphasis appears to remain on preserving social order and preventing tensions from escalating. This distinction is important. If the primary objective were punishment alone, the public narrative might look very different. Instead, many analysts believe the authorities may be attempting to send a warning about the consequences of statements that could be interpreted as undermining national cohesion. Burkina Faso continues to face serious security threats from extremist violence. In such an environment, leaders often view social unity as a strategic necessity rather than a political slogan. From this perspective, the government's actions could be interpreted as preventive rather than purely punitive. Whether one agrees with that approach or not, it helps explain why the situation remains under close observation. As a result, some citizens have begun asking a question that seemed unlikely at the beginning of the controversy. Could this case ultimately end through dialogue and reconciliation rather than a prolonged confrontation? One of the strongest reasons some observers believe the situation could eventually move toward a peaceful resolution is the reaction of Burkina Faso's Muslim organizations. In many countries, the detention of a well-known religious leader can trigger demonstrations, confrontational statements, and a rapid escalation of tensions. Yet, the response following Imam Kindo's detention has been notably different. Rather than encouraging confrontation, major Muslim organizations have repeatedly called for calm, patience, and respect for public institutions. Their message has focused on avoiding rumors, preserving social harmony, and allowing official processes to continue. This response is significant because it suggests that important channels of communication may still exist between religious leaders and state authorities. For many analysts, this is one of the most overlooked aspects of the entire story. If religious organizations believed that all possibilities for dialogue had disappeared, their public position might be much more aggressive. Instead, they have consistently emphasized restraint and responsibility. The influence of Imam Kindo within the Muslim community makes this approach even more important. He is not an unknown figure. His sermons have reached large audiences, and many people continue to follow his teachings closely. Because of that influence, community leaders understand that every public statement can affect national stability. The decision to promote calm rather than confrontation may reflect a shared understanding that Burkina Faso faces challenges far greater than any single controversy. The country continues to battle insecurity, economic pressures, and the threat of extremist violence. For this reason, many observers believe both religious organizations and government officials have strong incentives to avoid a prolonged conflict. While no one can predict the final outcome, the continued emphasis on dialogue has encouraged some citizens to believe that negotiations and mutual understanding may still play an important role in determining what happens next. To fully understand the possibility of Imam Kindo's future release, it is necessary to examine the perspective of President Ibrahim Traore and the priorities that have shaped his leadership. Since taking power, Traore has consistently presented national unity as one of the foundations of Burkina Faso's survival. His speeches frequently emphasize sovereignty, security, resilience, and the need for citizens to stand together against threats facing the country. This approach is closely linked to the reality Burkina Faso faces today. For years, armed extremist groups have attempted to exploit local grievances, social frustrations, and community divisions. Their objective is not only to challenge state authority, but also to weaken the bonds that hold society together. Because of this reality, government officials often view potentially divisive messages through a security lens rather than simply a religious or political one. Many supporters of the current administration argue that the state has become particularly sensitive to any public discourse that could increase tensions between communities. Whether those concerns are justified or not, they help explain why authorities may react quickly when they believe national cohesion could be affected. At the same time, there is an important distinction that deserves attention. For many observers, the actions taken against Imam Kindo should not automatically be interpreted as opposition to Islam itself. Burkina Faso is home to a large Muslim population, and religious institutions remain an important part of national life. Instead, supporters of the government argue that the objective is to prevent messages that could deepen social divisions during a period of exceptional national difficulty. Understanding this distinction is essential because it provides insight into how the authorities may be evaluating the case and what factors could influence future decisions regarding Imam Kindo. Understanding President Ibrahim Traore's priorities helps explain why many observers continue to believe that a future release for Imam Kindo remains possible. From the government's perspective, several objectives must be achieved simultaneously. Authorities want to preserve public order, reinforce the authority of state institutions, and prevent messages that could be interpreted as encouraging division. At the same time, they must also maintain constructive relations with religious communities that play an essential role in national life. This delicate balance is one reason why the case continues to attract attention. Imam Kindo is not only a religious leader, he is also a respected public figure with significant influence among many citizens. Decisions involving individuals of this stature often require careful consideration because they can affect social stability far beyond the immediate legal questions. For this reason, some analysts believe that if authorities conclude their objectives have been achieved, a more flexible outcome could become possible. Such an outcome might allow the government to reaffirm its position on national unity while avoiding a prolonged dispute with influential religious circles. Of course, no one outside official institutions can predict the final decision. Any suggestion that Imam Kindo will certainly be released would go beyond the available evidence. However, the combination of restrained public messaging, continued calls for calm from religious organizations, and the absence of a highly confrontational approach has encouraged speculation that dialogue may still play a role in the resolution of the case. Whether that speculation proves correct remains to be seen. Yet, for many citizens, these developments are among the strongest reasons for believing that the story of Imam Kindo may not have reached its final chapter. The case of Imam Kindo has also sparked a broader debate that extends far beyond Burkina Faso. It touches on a question that many African nations continue to face. How should governments balance freedom of expression, religious influence, and national security during periods of instability? Some international observers and human rights advocates may view the detention of a religious leader with concern. From their perspective, any action involving a public figure known for religious preaching raises important questions about freedom of speech and religious liberty. These concerns are not unique to Burkina Faso. Similar debates have emerged in many countries whenever governments intervene in matters involving influential religious voices. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's current leadership often present a different argument. They point to the country's ongoing struggle against extremist violence and the serious security threats that continue to affect communities across the nation. In their view, leaders cannot evaluate controversial statements solely through the lens of individual freedoms. They must also consider the potential impact on public stability and national cohesion. This difference in perspective helps explain why reactions to the case vary so widely. What some international critics may interpret as a restriction of liberty, others may see as a preventive measure designed to protect society during a period of extraordinary challenges. The debate surrounding Imam Kindo therefore reflects a larger conversation taking place across Africa. It is a conversation about sovereignty, security, social harmony, and the difficult choices governments sometimes face when trying to protect both freedom and stability at the same time. As the debate surrounding Imam Mohammed Isaac Kindo continues, one reality remains clear. This story is no longer only about a single religious leader. It has become a reflection of the challenges facing Burkina Faso as it seeks to protect national unity while respecting the important role of faith in society. At this stage, there is no confirmed evidence proving that Imam Kindo will soon be released. Any prediction presented as certainty would be irresponsible. However, there are several developments that continue to attract attention. The absence of a final public resolution, the measured response from religious organizations, and the continued emphasis on calm and dialogue have all contributed to speculation that a less confrontational outcome may still be possible. At the same time, the government of Ibrahim Traore faces a difficult responsibility. It must preserve social cohesion, confront security threats, and maintain public confidence while navigating sensitive religious issues that affect millions of citizens. The outcome of this case may ultimately reveal how Burkina Faso intends to balance these competing priorities in the years ahead. Whatever happens next, the discussion has already provided an important lesson for the continent. African nations continue searching for ways to strengthen unity without sacrificing stability, and to protect security without creating deeper divisions. This is why the Imam Kindo case is being watched far beyond Burkina Faso. If you have an opinion on how governments should respond in situations like this, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more analysis on Pan-African issues, Burkina Faso, Africa New Developments, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and the future role of Ibrahim Traore in shaping the continent, be sure to subscribe and join us in the next discussion. Look at the map of West Africa today. Look closely at Mali. Look at Burkina Faso. Look at Niger. Across the Sahel, something extraordinary is happening. Nations that once depended heavily on foreign military partnerships are now attempting to build their own path. They are closing doors that remained open for decades. They are speaking the language of sovereignty, self-reliance, and national control. Then suddenly, another headline appears. While the alliance of Sahel states continues moving toward greater independence, Ghana has signed a historic security and defense partnership with the European Union and accepted a package worth €50 million, approximately $54 million. The package includes surveillance drones, anti-drone technology, intelligence systems, communications equipment, and border security support. For some observers, this is a smart and practical decision designed to strengthen Ghana's security. For others, it raises uncomfortable questions about whether Europe is finding a new foothold in West Africa after losing influence in the Sahel. So what is really happening? Is this a security partnership that will make Ghana stronger, or is it the beginning of a new geopolitical struggle that could reshape the future of West Africa? Today, we will examine the details of the €50 million agreement, explore why the European Union suddenly considers Ghana so important, and ask whether this deal represents protection, partnership, or something much bigger. And if you appreciate honest discussions about Africa's changing political landscape, make sure you follow the channel because the story unfolding today may influence the future of the entire region. The agreement itself immediately attracted attention across Africa. Ghana became the first African nation to establish this type of formal security and defense partnership with the European Union. The support package includes advanced surveillance drones, anti-drone systems, intelligence equipment, electronic warfare capabilities, communication technology, and resources for security forces operating near the northern border. On paper, it looks like a major investment in Ghana's safety, but across West Africa, many people were not simply looking at the equipment. They were looking at the timing. And that timing is what transformed a security agreement into one of the most debated geopolitical developments in the region. The question many Africans are asking today is simple. Why is Europe suddenly so interested in Ghana? To answer that question, we have to look beyond Accra and examine what has happened across the Sahel over the past few years. For decades, Western governments maintained significant security influence in countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Military missions, training programs, intelligence cooperation, and foreign bases became major features of the regional security landscape. The stated objective was clear: fight terrorism, strengthen stability, and support local governments. But something changed. Military transitions took place in all three countries. New leaders emerged. Public frustration grew. Many citizens began questioning whether years of foreign involvement had actually improved security conditions. Instead of seeing progress, many communities continued to face violence, instability, and displacement. As political attitudes shifted, the relationship between the Sahel states and Western powers began to deteriorate. Foreign military forces were asked to leave. Long-standing partnerships weakened. Western influence across the region declined dramatically. This is where Ghana enters the story. Unlike the alliance of Sahel states, Ghana has remained politically stable and continues to maintain strong relationships with international partners. Geographically, it occupies a strategic position along the Gulf of Guinea while sharing regional security concerns connected to instability further north. From a European perspective, Ghana offers something valuable. It is stable, cooperative, and strategically located. Supporters of the new partnership argue that this is simply common sense. If security threats are moving southward, then cooperation should also move southward. They see the agreement as preventive action designed to stop instability before it reaches Ghanaian communities. Critics see a different picture. They argue that after losing influence in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Europe needed a new partner capable of maintaining visibility in the region. In their view, Ghana is not merely receiving assistance. It is becoming an important strategic platform in a changing geopolitical landscape. Whether one agrees with that interpretation or not, one fact remains impossible to ignore. The timing of this partnership has transformed a security agreement into a much larger debate about influence, sovereignty, and the future direction of West Africa. At the center of this controversy is a question that neither supporters nor critics can completely ignore. Does Ghana genuinely need this partnership? The answer is more complicated than many people are willing to admit. Unlike some of the emotional debates taking place online, Ghana faces real security concerns. The northern regions of the country sit close to areas affected by instability in the Sahel. Security experts have repeatedly warned that violent extremist groups operating in neighboring regions could attempt to expand their influence further south. From the perspective of Ghanaian policymakers, preparing for future threats is not optional. It is a responsibility. This is exactly why officials in Accra welcomed the new partnership. Advanced surveillance drones can improve border monitoring. Anti-drone systems can help defend sensitive infrastructure. Intelligence equipment can strengthen early warning capabilities. Communication systems can improve coordination among security forces. Viewed through this lens, The agreement appears practical rather than political. The European Union presents a similar argument. European leaders argue that security challenges no longer stop at national borders. Terrorism, organized crime, cyber threats, and illegal trafficking affect multiple regions simultaneously. According to this view, supporting Ghana contributes to stability across both West Africa and Europe. Yet critics remain skeptical. They point out that security partnerships often involve more than equipment. Modern intelligence systems collect information, surveillance systems generate data, communication networks create access points. The key question becomes who ultimately controls those capabilities. If the technology comes from abroad, who manages upgrades? Who controls technical support? Who has access to sensitive information? Who determines long-term operational standards? These questions do not automatically mean the partnership is harmful, but they explain why many Africans are debating the issue so intensely. The real discussion is no longer about drones or equipment. It is about strategic independence. Can a nation strengthen its security through foreign cooperation while still maintaining complete control over its own future? That question may ultimately determine how history judges Ghana's decision. The debate surrounding Ghana's agreement with the European Union becomes even more interesting when we compare it with the path chosen by the alliance of Sahel states. Today, West Africa appears to be developing two very different visions for its future security architecture. The first vision is represented by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Rather than relying heavily on external military partnerships, these countries are attempting to build collective security through regional cooperation. The Alliance of Sahel States was created with the goal of strengthening military coordination, intelligence sharing, and joint operations among its members. Their leaders argue that African nations must become the primary defenders of African security. Supporters of this approach believe genuine sovereignty requires control over military planning, intelligence gathering, and strategic decision-making. They argue that dependence on foreign security structures can create vulnerabilities that eventually limit national freedom of action. The second vision is represented by Ghana's recent partnership with the European Union. Instead of reducing international cooperation, Ghana has chosen to deepen it. Supporters believe modern security threats are too complex for any country to face alone. Access to advanced technology, training, intelligence support, and financial resources can strengthen national defenses and help prevent future crises. Neither model is entirely without merit. The AES approach offers greater strategic independence, but also requires significant financial resources, military capacity, and long-term political commitment. Building self-sufficient security institutions is a difficult process that may take many years. The Ghana approach provides immediate access to valuable capabilities and expertise. However, critics worry that long-term reliance on external partners could gradually weaken strategic autonomy. This is why the current debate extends far beyond Ghana itself. West Africa is becoming a testing ground for two competing philosophies. One prioritizes self-reliance even when the road is difficult. The other prioritizes partnership even if it raises concerns about dependence. The outcome of this debate may influence how future generations of African leaders define security, sovereignty, and national development throughout the continent. To fully understand why this agreement generated such strong reactions, we must look at the leaders who have come to symbolize the movement for greater sovereignty in the Sahel. No figure has captured more attention in recent years than Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. To his supporters, Traore represents a new generation of African leadership. His message consistently focuses on self-reliance, national dignity, and reducing dependence on external powers. Whether people agree with him or not, His popularity has transformed him into one of the most influential political voices in contemporary African debates. From the perspective of many Traore supporters, the critical issue is not the 50 million euros. The real issue is control. Who owns the technology? Who controls the data? Who determines how security systems operate in the future? Those questions often matter more than the value of the equipment itself. Similar ideas can be found in the approaches of Mali's Assimi Goïta and Niger's Abdourahmane Chiani. Both leaders have promoted the argument that national security must remain under national command. They believe foreign partnerships should support local institutions rather than become the foundation upon which security depends. This explains why many supporters of the alliance of Sahel states reacted strongly to Ghana's decision. To them, the agreement appears to move in the opposite direction from the path currently being pursued by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. While the AES seeks greater control over its security systems, Ghana has chosen deeper engagement with an external partner. Of course, supporters of Ghana's position would argue that sovereignty and cooperation are not mutually exclusive. A country can work with international partners while still protecting its national interests. Yet the disagreement remains significant because it reflects two very different visions of Africa's future. One vision seeks maximum autonomy. The other seeks strategic partnerships. The debate surrounding Ghana's agreement is ultimately a debate about which vision will shape the next chapter of West African history. The controversy surrounding the alliance of Sahel states does not end within Africa. It has also generated strong reactions from Western governments, policy experts, and international organizations. Critics of the AES argue that the alliance risks isolating itself from valuable international partnerships. They claim that reducing cooperation with traditional security partners could weaken counterterrorism efforts, limit access to resources, and create new economic challenges. According to this perspective, modern security threats are global in nature. No nation can address them entirely alone. International cooperation is viewed not as a weakness but as a necessity. Supporters of the AES offer a different response. They point to decades of foreign military involvement across parts of the Sahel and ask a simple question: if the previous model was successful, why did insecurity continue to spread? Many supporters argue that the issue is not cooperation itself. The issue is dependence. They believe African nations should be able to choose partnerships from a position of strength rather than necessity. This distinction is important. The debate is not between isolation and cooperation, it is between partnership and reliance. For Ghana, and for other African countries, the lesson may be straightforward. International support can provide valuable tools, training, and resources. However, long-term security remains strongest when local institutions maintain control over strategy, decision-making, and national priorities. As West Africa continues to evolve, every country will face the same challenge. How do you benefit from global partnerships without surrendering strategic independence? That question may become one of the defining issues of Africa's future. As we reach the end of this discussion, one thing becomes clear: the debate surrounding Ghana's 50 million euro agreement with the European Union is about far more than money, drones, or security equipment. At its core, this is a debate about the future direction of West Africa. On one side, Ghana has chosen a path that embraces international cooperation, advanced technology, and strategic partnerships. Supporters believe this approach can strengthen national security and help the country prepare for threats that continue to emerge across the region. On the other side, the alliance of Sahel states is pursuing a different vision. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are attempting to build greater self-reliance, greater control over security policy, and greater independence from external influence. Their leaders argue that true sovereignty requires national command over the institutions responsible for protecting the nation. Neither path is without risks. Partnership can bring resources, expertise, and immediate capabilities. But dependence can become a burden if control slowly shifts away from national institutions. Autonomy can strengthen sovereignty and national confidence. But self-reliance also demands patience, sacrifice, and the ability to overcome difficult challenges without outside assistance. That is why the real question is not whether Ghana should accept 50 million euros. The real question is whether Ghana can accept assistance while maintaining complete control over its strategic future. The answer to that question will not only affect Ghana, it may influence the future of Pan-African thought, the evolution of the African Union, and the broader conversation surrounding Pan-Africanism throughout the continent. As nations such as Burkina Faso continue to promote a new vision of sovereignty under leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traore, and as voices supporting Africa, new political thinking continue to grow. The choices made today will shape the continent for decades to come. Whether one agrees with Ibrahim Traore and the alliance of Sahel states or supports Ghana's approach, every African nation faces the same challenge. How do you engage the world without losing control of your own destiny? Thank you for watching. If you enjoy serious discussions about African geopolitics, strategic independence, and the future of the continent, please subscribe to the channel and join us for the next conversation. What happens when one of West Africa's most respected economic strategists shakes hands with one of the continent's most influential voices for sovereignty and security? Could this meeting become the beginning of a new chapter for the entire region? That question is now being asked across West Africa following the highly anticipated visit of President Romuald Wadagni of Benin to Burkina Faso, where he was personally welcomed by Captain Ibrahim Traore. While many diplomatic visits come and go without leaving a lasting impact, this one appears different. At a time when terrorism continues to threaten communities across the Sahel and neighboring coastal states, the meeting between these two leaders has sparked discussions about a possible new era of cooperation. For many observers, this was not simply a ceremonial exchange between two heads of state. It was a meeting between two leaders who represent different strengths but face the same regional challenges. One is widely known for his economic expertise and development vision. The other has become a symbol of determination in the fight against insecurity and extremism. Together, they discussed security, trade, regional stability, and economic development. The timing of this visit is particularly important. Across West Africa, governments are searching for practical solutions to growing security threats, while also trying to create opportunities for economic growth. Many people now believe that stronger cooperation between Benin and Burkina Faso could help address both objectives at the same time. In this report, we will examine why this meeting matters, why it is attracting attention across the region, and whether the partnership between Romuald Wadagni and Ibrahim Traore could influence the future direction of West Africa. If you enjoy following the events shaping Africa's future, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more analysis. To understand why this visit generated so much interest, we must first understand the role of Romuald Wadagni. Before becoming president of Benin, he earned a reputation as one of the country's leading economic reformers. His career was built around financial management, investment planning, and policies designed to strengthen Benin's economy. This background helps explain his approach to leadership, rather than viewing security and economic growth as separate issues. Wadagni sees them as closely connected. Economic development requires stability. Investors need safe environments. Trade depends on secure transportation routes. Communities cannot prosper when insecurity threatens daily life. For that reason, his outreach to neighboring countries shortly after taking office was not accidental. It reflected a strategic understanding that Benin's future is linked to the stability of the wider region. His decision to engage directly with leaders in the Sahel signals a willingness to pursue cooperation where common interests exist. That is why his arrival in Ouagadougou was more than a diplomatic visit. It was a message that Benin may be preparing to play a larger role in shaping the future of West Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traore has become one of the most closely watched leaders in Africa, and understanding his role helps explain why the visit from President Romuald Wadagni attracted so much attention. Over the past few years, Burkina Faso has found itself on the front line of the struggle against extremist violence in the Sahel. Faced with growing security threats, Traore emerged as a leader determined to place national security and sovereignty at the center of government policy. His message has been consistent. No nation can defeat terrorism alone, and no country can build lasting prosperity while communities live under constant threat. This position has earned him support among many Africans who believe the continent must take greater responsibility for solving its own challenges. Whether people agree with all of his policies or not, few can deny that he has become an influential voice in discussions about the future of the Sahels. For Benin, Traore's experience carries particular importance. In recent years, extremist groups operating in the wider Sahel have expanded their activities toward coastal countries. Northern Benin has increasingly faced security concerns linked to instability beyond its borders. This means that cooperation with countries already confronting these threats is becoming more valuable than ever. The significance of Traore personally welcoming Wadagni should not be overlooked. Such gestures often send powerful diplomatic messages. In this case, the welcome suggested a willingness to strengthen dialogue, expand cooperation, and search for common solutions despite political differences that may have existed in the past. More importantly, the meeting highlighted a growing realization across West Africa. Security and development are no longer separate conversations. A secure region creates opportunities for trade, investment, infrastructure projects, and job creation. An unstable region threatens them all. By bringing together Benin's economic vision and Burkina Faso's security experience, Wadagni and Traore may be laying the groundwork for a partnership built on practical interests rather than political labels. The handshake between Romuald Wadagni and Ibrahim Traore carries significance far beyond the images seen at the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. For many analysts, it represents a possible shift in the political landscape of West Africa, where security realities are increasingly encouraging countries to cooperate despite past disagreements. For several years, relations between the alliance of Sahel states and some neighboring countries followed different political paths. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger focused on building new regional structures through the alliance of Sahel states, while other countries maintained different diplomatic priorities. As a result, many observers spoke about growing divisions across the region. However, the rise of terrorist threats has begun to change the conversation. Extremist groups do not recognize political boundaries. They move across borders, exploit weak security zones, and threaten communities regardless of national affiliations. This shared danger is creating powerful incentives for governments to work together. In that context, the meeting between Wadagni and Traore sends a clear message. It suggests that practical cooperation may be becoming more important than political differences. Security challenges require coordination, intelligence sharing, border management, and constant communication among neighboring countries. The visit also raises an important possibility. Benin could emerge as a bridge between coastal states and the alliance of Sahel states. Such a role would allow Benin to support regional dialogue while protecting its own national interests. Given its geographic position and economic importance, Benin is uniquely placed to encourage cooperation between different parts of West Africa. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this meeting is its symbolism. For years, headlines often focused on disagreement and division. This visit offered a different image. It showed two leaders discussing common challenges and exploring common solutions. Whether the partnership ultimately transforms the region remains to be seen. But the message was unmistakable. Dialogue remains possible, cooperation remains valuable, and shared interests may prove stronger than political differences. That is why many people across West Africa are paying close attention. The handshake between Wadagni and Traore may ultimately be remembered not simply as a diplomatic gesture, but as the beginning of a new conversation about the future of regional unity and security. While diplomatic meetings often focus on ceremonies and official statements, the reality facing West Africa today is far more urgent. Across large parts of the Sahel, terrorist organizations continue to expand their operations, creating one of the most serious security challenges the region has faced in decades. Groups linked to violent extremism have learned how to exploit vast border areas, limited infrastructure, and weak state presence in remote communities. Their operations are no longer confined to a single country. Instead, they move across borders, taking advantage of gaps in regional coordination. This is why security experts increasingly describe terrorism in West Africa as a regional problem that requires regional solutions. For Benin, the threat has become impossible to ignore. In recent years, northern areas of the country have experienced growing pressure from extremist networks operating near the borders with Burkina Faso and Niger. What was once viewed as a challenge concentrated in the Sahel is now affecting coastal states as well. Communities that previously felt distant from the conflict are becoming more exposed to instability. This reality helps explain why cooperation between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Benin is receiving so much attention. All three countries face a common threat, even if they experience it in different ways. Information sharing, border coordination, joint planning, and stronger communication can significantly improve their ability to respond. The meeting between Wadagni and Traore reflects this growing understanding. Neither country can fully secure its future without support from its neighbors. Terrorist groups operate across borders, so efforts to stop them must do the same. Perhaps most importantly, the fight against terrorism is about more than military operations. It is about protecting families, preserving trade routes, supporting local economies, and creating conditions where young people can see opportunities instead of conflict. Security has become the foundation upon which every other development goal depends. As a result, the growing partnership between Benin and Burkina Faso may represent more than diplomacy. It may be part of a broader effort to create a safer and more stable future for the entire region. Beyond security cooperation, another important reason this visit matters is economics. In fact, many analysts believe that economic interests may become one of the strongest foundations of the growing relationship between Benin and Burkina Faso. One of the most strategic assets in this discussion is the port of Cotonou. Located on the Atlantic coast, it serves as a critical gateway for trade entering and leaving several countries in the region. For a landlocked nation such as Burkina Faso, reliable access to international markets is essential for economic growth, industrial development, and the movement of vital goods. Every year, large volumes of food products, fuel, construction materials, machinery, and consumer goods pass through transportation corridors connected to Benin. When these routes operate efficiently, businesses benefit, prices remain more stable, and economic activity expands. When insecurity disrupts transportation networks, the consequences are felt throughout the region. This is where security and economics become closely connected. A safer corridor means more trade. More trade creates jobs, attracts investment, and generates government revenue that can be used for development projects. For both Benin and Burkina Faso, protecting strategic transport routes is not simply a security objective. It is an economic necessity. The discussions between Ouadagni and Traore reflected this reality. Both leaders understand that long-term prosperity depends on cooperation. Burkina Faso needs reliable access to coastal trade routes, while Benin benefits from stronger commercial links with the Sahel. Their interests are different in some respects, but they are also highly complementary. For ordinary citizens, the benefits could be significant. Stronger economic cooperation can support local businesses, improve regional commerce, encourage infrastructure development, and create opportunities for future generations. This is one reason why many observers see the partnership as more than a diplomatic initiative. It represents an effort to connect security, trade, and development into a single regional vision. As the relationship between Benin and Burkina Faso grows closer, not everyone is viewing these developments in the same way. Some Western analysts and international observers have expressed concerns about the changing political landscape in West Africa, particularly regarding the rise of the Alliance of Sahel states and the emergence of new regional partnerships. One common criticism is that the creation of alternative regional structures could weaken existing frameworks for cooperation. Others argue that stronger emphasis on sovereignty may reduce engagement with traditional international partners. Some analysts also question whether governments facing security threats can balance defense spending with long-term economic development. These concerns deserve consideration, but they also require context. The reality facing many countries in the Sahel is that security threats have reached levels that directly affect daily life, economic activity, and national stability. Without security, development projects become difficult to sustain. Schools close, businesses struggle, investment declines, and communities face increasing uncertainty. From this perspective, prioritizing security is not necessarily a rejection of development. Instead, many leaders see it as a prerequisite for development. A country cannot fully benefit from trade, education, healthcare, or infrastructure programs if large portions of its territory remain vulnerable to violence. Another important point is that sovereignty does not automatically mean isolation. Countries can seek greater control over their national decisions while continuing to cooperate with regional and international partners. In fact, the meeting between Ouadagni and Traore demonstrates exactly that principle. Rather than withdrawing from engagement, both leaders are expanding dialogue and building new partnerships based on shared interests. Ultimately, the most important measure of success will not be political rhetoric. It will be results. Are communities becoming safer? Is trade increasing? Are jobs being created? Are living conditions improving? These are the questions that will determine whether this new approach delivers lasting benefits for the people of West Africa. The visit of President Romuald Ouadagni to Burkina Faso may eventually be remembered as more than a diplomatic event. It brought together two leaders whose priorities reflect the most important challenges facing West Africa today. On one side stands a leader focused on economic growth, investment, and development. On the other stands a leader known for emphasizing security, sovereignty, and regional resilience. Their meeting demonstrated that these goals are not competing priorities. They are deeply connected. Throughout this report, we have seen how terrorism continues to threaten communities across the region, how economic corridors remain vital for prosperity, and how cooperation between neighboring countries has become increasingly necessary. The discussions between Wadagni and Traore highlighted a growing recognition that no nation can fully succeed in isolation. Security, trade, and development now depend on stronger regional partnerships. The broader lesson extends beyond Benin and Burkina Faso. Many African nations face similar challenges. The ability to cooperate while protecting national interests may become one of the defining factors shaping the continent's future. Dialogue, coordination, and practical solutions often achieve more than division and confrontation. Whether this meeting ultimately becomes a historic turning point will depend on the actions that follow. Agreements must lead to results. Partnerships must produce tangible benefits for ordinary citizens. Success will be measured by safer communities, stronger economies, and greater opportunities for future generations. For supporters of Pan-African cooperation, this moment offers an encouraging example of what can happen when leaders choose common interests over political differences. As Burkina Faso and Benin strengthen ties, many observers will be watching closely to see whether this spirit of collaboration influences the wider region. The vision often associated with Captain Ibrahim Traore, the aspirations of Pan-Africanism, the role of the African Union, and the emergence of an Africa new built on cooperation rather than division, all connect to this larger story. Time will tell how far this partnership goes, but the handshake between Romuald Wadani and Ibrahim Traore has already sparked an important conversation about the future of West Africa. If you believe stronger cooperation can help create a more stable and prosperous future for Africa, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and join us for our next report. What if a journey of barely 56 miles could take 4 days to complete? What if every mile carried the threat of hidden explosives, vehicle breakdowns, and sudden attacks? And what if the arrival of a convoy could bring entire communities to the roadside in celebration? For years, the towns of Seba and Solhan in Burkina Faso's Sahel region lived under difficult conditions. Armed violence, insecurity, and isolation disrupted daily life. Roads became dangerous, trade slowed, access to healthcare and education became increasingly difficult. Many families faced uncertainty about their future. Recently, a military escort convoy carrying food, medicine, and essential supplies completed a mission that many considered impossible, more than a delivery operation. It became a symbol of recovery for communities that had endured years of hardship. In this story, we will follow the convoy's dangerous journey and discover why its arrival has become a powerful sign of hope for Seba and Solhan. We will also explore what this recovery could mean for Burkina Faso and for other parts of Africa facing similar challenges. If you enjoy learning about the resilience of African communities and the efforts being made to rebuild lives in difficult circumstances, consider following the channel for more stories like this one. The convoy departed from Dori and moved towards some of the most sensitive areas of the Sahel. The distance was not especially long, but the dangers were enormous. Soldiers faced the constant threat of improvised explosive devices hidden along the route. Demining teams carefully inspected the road ahead, while engineers remained ready to respond to breakdowns and obstacles. Trucks carrying vital supplies often struggled through difficult terrain. Every stop increased risk, and every delay created new challenges. Yet the convoy continued forward. For the soldiers involved, this mission was about more than moving cargo. It was about reopening a lifeline to communities that had spent years waiting for signs that normal life could return. Before the convoy arrived, daily life in Ceiba and Solhan had become a struggle that extended far beyond security concerns. Years of instability had affected nearly every aspect of life. What many people outside the region often overlook is that the consequences of insecurity are not measured only by battles or attacks. They are measured by empty shelves, closed classrooms, delayed medical treatment, and families forced to leave their homes. In these communities, access to essential goods became increasingly difficult. Merchants faced enormous risks when transporting products. As a result, prices rose, and supplies became less reliable. Residents often had to adapt to shortages and uncertainty while trying to maintain a sense of normal life. Healthcare providers faced their own challenges. Medical facilities continued operating despite limited resources, equipment shortages, and infrastructure problems. Staff members worked under difficult conditions because they understood that many residents had nowhere else to seek treatment. Even routine medical care became a challenge when transportation routes were unsafe. Education also suffered. Schools that should have been filled with students and teachers struggled to function consistently. Families worried not only about their children's safety, but also about their future. Every interruption in education threatened to create long-term consequences for an entire generation. Many families chose to leave, seeking safety elsewhere. Others stayed behind, determined to protect their homes, land, and communities. Their decision required courage and patience. They endured years of uncertainty while hoping conditions would eventually improve. This is what makes the recent changes so significant. The story of Ceiba and Solhan is not simply about military progress. It is about communities that refused to disappear. It is about people who endured isolation and hardship while holding on to the belief that one day roads would reopen, services would return, and life could begin moving forward again. No place captures the pain of Burkina Faso's recent history more than Solhan. Long before the convoy arrived, the town had become known across the country for one of the darkest tragedies in the nation's struggle against armed violence. In June 2021, Solhan experienced a devastating attack that shocked Burkina Faso and drew international attention. Families lost loved ones. Entire households were shattered. Survivors were left carrying memories that would remain with them for years. What happened that night transformed the town into a symbol of loss and suffering. Even today, the scars remain visible. Some residents still visit the graves of relatives and friends who never returned home. Others continue to live with emotional wounds that cannot be measured or easily healed. For many families, recovery is not simply about rebuilding homes or restoring businesses. It is about learning how to move forward while carrying the weight of painful memories. Yet one of the most remarkable aspects of Solhan's story is that the community refused to surrender to despair. Despite the tragedy, people stayed connected to their land and their identity. Those who left often dreamed of returning. Those who remained continued searching for ways to preserve normal life. When visitors arrive today, they encounter a place where grief and resilience exist side by side. The memory of the victims remains strong, but so does the determination of the living. Markets are gradually returning, schools are reopening, families are rebuilding routines that once seemed impossible. This is why the arrival of the convoy carried such powerful meaning. It represented far more than supplies and logistics. It symbolized progress in a town that many feared would never recover. Every truck that entered Solhan served as a reminder that the community had survived one of the darkest chapters in its history and was slowly writing a new one. As the convoy pushed deeper into the Sahel, Its mission became about far more than delivering supplies. Along the route, soldiers encountered civilians who depended on the convoy not only for food and goods, but also for assistance that could mean the difference between life and death. One of the most memorable moments involved a young child who required medical attention. Far from major hospitals and surrounded by difficult terrain, the family had limited options. Military medical personnel stepped in, providing care and helping restore hope to a worried mother in a region where access to health care can be interrupted by insecurity. Such moments carry enormous significance. The convoy also distributed water to civilians traveling alongside the route. Many families endured long journeys under harsh conditions. Simple necessities that people in safer areas often take for granted became valuable resources. Every bottle of water, every medical consultation, and every act of assistance strengthened the bond between the convoy and the communities it served. As news of the convoy's approach spread, residents began gathering along the roads. Men, women, and children emerged to witness something they had not seen regularly for years. For many, the convoy represented safety, connection, and the return of state support. The excitement was genuine because the arrival of supplies signaled that their communities had not been forgotten. The atmosphere changed dramatically once the convoy reached its destination. Instead of fear and uncertainty, there were signs of confidence returning. People spoke about rebuilding, trading, farming, and improving daily life. The presence of security forces was no longer viewed solely through a military lens. It was increasingly connected to stability and opportunity. This is why the convoy became a symbol far greater than the trucks themselves. It carried food, medicine, and equipment, but it also carried reassurance. It reminded residents that even after years of hardship, recovery was possible. In Ceiba and Solhan, hope arrived on wheels, and entire communities came together to welcome it. The most visible sign of recovery in Ceiba and Solhan is not found in military checkpoints or convoy schedules. It is found in ordinary scenes that many people once feared they would never see again. Children are returning to classrooms, patients are receiving treatment, farmers are working their fields. Daily life is slowly reclaiming its place. Education has become one of the strongest symbols of this transformation. Schools that struggled during years of insecurity are gradually reopening their doors. Teachers continue their work despite limited resources, believing that education remains essential to the future of their communities. Every student who returns to class represents a victory against fear and disruption. Healthcare workers are showing the same determination. Medical facilities continue serving residents even while facing shortages of equipment, personnel, and reliable energy. Their efforts ensure that families can access care closer to home instead of undertaking dangerous journeys in search of treatment. For many residents, the continued operation of these facilities is a sign that normal life is becoming possible once again. Agriculture is also beginning to recover. As security conditions improve, farmers are returning to fields that had become difficult or dangerous to access. Communities that depend on local production are gradually rebuilding their economic foundations. Small improvements in farming can create major benefits for food security and household income. These changes may appear modest when viewed individually. A classroom reopening, a clinic treating patients, a farmer returning to work. Yet together, they reveal something much larger. They demonstrate that stability creates opportunities for communities to rebuild themselves from the ground up. The story of Ceiba and Solhan shows that recovery is not defined by a single event. It is built through countless everyday actions carried out by teachers, healthcare workers, farmers, merchants, and families who refuse to give up on their future. Their perseverance is helping transform hope into reality. Beneath the surface of the recovery story lies another important reality. The region surrounding Solhan and Ceiba is not only strategically important because of its location, it is also rich in natural resources, particularly gold. For years, gold has played a major role in the local economy, providing income for families and opportunities for thousands of workers. During the convoy's journey, reporters visited artisanal mining areas where miners had gradually returned to work. Many described how improved security conditions allowed them to resume activities that had once become too dangerous. For these workers, access to mining sites means more than economic opportunity. It means the ability to support their families and rebuild their lives. This connection between security and economic recovery is central to understanding the broader transformation taking place. Communities cannot fully recover if people are unable to work, trade, or earn a living. Restoring safety creates the conditions necessary for local economies to function again. Many residents connect these developments to broader national efforts aimed at strengthening territorial control and protecting national resources. In conversations with local miners and residents, there is a recurring belief that stability and economic independence must advance together. The goal is not simply to secure territory, but to ensure that local communities can benefit from the resources found beneath their own soil. The discussion often extends to the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Supporters argue that restoring security, protecting strategic resources, and expanding state presence are necessary steps toward long-term national development, whether viewed through the lens of security or economics. Many residents see a direct connection between improved stability and renewed opportunity. For the people of Ceiba and Solhan, gold represents more than wealth. It represents self-reliance, dignity, and the possibility of building a stronger future. As miners return to work and economic activity slowly expands, the recovery of these communities becomes about more than survival. It becomes about creating conditions where future generations can thrive rather than simply endure. The journey of the convoy to Ceiba and Solhan offers lessons that reach far beyond two communities in Burkina Faso. It demonstrates how recovery begins when security, public services, economic activity, and community resilience work together. The convoy crossed dangerous roads, passed through areas once isolated by violence, and delivered more than food and medicine. It delivered evidence that change is possible. The transformation taking place in Ceiba and Solhan remains incomplete. Challenges still exist. Infrastructure needs improvement. Public services require additional support. Economic growth must continue. Yet, the progress already visible has given many residents something that cannot be measured in statistics alone: confidence in the future. The story also highlights an important debate. Some international observers continue to question whether current approaches will produce lasting stability. Others argue that long-term success should be judged by practical results on the ground. For many local residents, the most meaningful indicators are simple. Children are returning to school. Patients are receiving treatment. Farmers are working their land. Merchants are reopening businesses. Communities are reconnecting with the rest of the country. There are lessons here for other African nations facing similar challenges. Security is essential, but it must be connected to development. Natural resources are valuable, but they must create opportunities for local populations. Recovery becomes sustainable only when ordinary citizens see tangible improvements in their daily lives. As Burkina Faso continues its journey, Ceiba and Solhan stand as powerful examples of resilience. Their story reflects the determination of communities that refuse to surrender despite years of hardship. It also reflects broader conversations about sovereignty, development, and the future of the continent. Many supporters of Pan-African ideals view these developments as part of a larger movement shaping Burkina Faso. and the wider Africa new generation. Discussions surrounding Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore himself often center on the same question: how can African nations build security, prosperity, and self-reliance on their own terms? As you reflect on the remarkable recovery of Siba and Solon, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you would like to follow more stories about Burkina Faso and the transformation taking place across Africa, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next journey. How could a country often associated with security challenges suddenly become the destination for major new energy investments? That question is now being asked across Africa following the announcement of plans to build 2 new thermal power plants in Burkina Faso. One facility is expected to generate 200 megawatts in Ouagadougou, while another will provide 100 megawatts in Bobo Dioulasso. Together, they would add 300 megawatts of new electricity capacity to the national grid. At first glance, this may seem like a technical infrastructure project. In reality, it represents something much bigger. It reflects growing investor interest in Burkina Faso and raises important questions about the country's economic future under Captain Ibrahim Traore. Supporters of the current leadership view the project as evidence that Burkina Faso is becoming increasingly attractive to investors, despite the challenges often highlighted in international media. They argue that reliable energy is one of the most important foundations for economic growth, industrial development, and national self-reliance. In this video, we will examine why this project matters, what it could mean for ordinary citizens, and why many people believe it could become a turning point in Burkina Faso's development journey. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about Africa's transformation and emerging economic opportunities. To understand the importance of this announcement, we must first understand the scale of the project. 300 megawatts is not just a number. Electricity powers homes, schools, hospitals, businesses, and factories. Without sufficient electricity, economic growth becomes difficult. With 200 megawatts planned for Ouagadougou and 100 megawatts for Bobo Dioulasso, the project could help strengthen the country's 2 most important urban centers. More importantly, it could provide the energy needed to support future industries, create jobs, and improve daily life for thousands of families across Burkina Faso. For many years, access to reliable electricity has been one of the biggest obstacles to economic growth in Burkina Faso. While the country has made progress in expanding its energy infrastructure, demand for electricity continues to grow faster than supply. As cities expand, businesses multiply, and industrial ambitions increase, the pressure on the national power system becomes more visible. This challenge has affected both urban and rural communities. Businesses often face higher operating costs when power supplies are unstable. Small manufacturers may struggle to maintain production schedules. Hospitals, schools, and public services depend on reliable electricity to function effectively. In many areas, limited access to power can slow economic opportunities and reduce quality of life. Another important factor is Burkina Faso's historical dependence on imported electricity from neighboring countries. While regional cooperation remains valuable, relying heavily on external sources can expose a country to supply disruptions, price fluctuations, and limitations beyond its control. For a nation seeking greater economic sovereignty, strengthening domestic power generation becomes a strategic priority. This is why energy development has become a central part of Burkina Faso's long-term vision. The goal is not simply to produce more electricity. The broader objective is to create the conditions necessary for industrialization, investment, and sustainable economic growth. Reliable energy can attract factories, support local businesses, encourage foreign investment, and generate employment opportunities. Viewed from this perspective, the planned 300-megawatt project is not an isolated initiative. It fits into a larger national effort to expand energy capacity and reduce dependence on external sources. By increasing domestic electricity production, Burkina Faso hopes to build a stronger foundation for future development. For many citizens, the success of projects like this could mean more than improved infrastructure. It could represent greater economic opportunity, stronger public services, and a more resilient future for the next generation. If the announcement of 2 new thermal power plants sounds surprising, the reaction becomes even more interesting when we ask a simple question: why are investors still choosing Burkina Faso? For years, international coverage of Burkina Faso has focused heavily on security concerns and political uncertainty. As a result, many outside observers assume that investors would avoid the country. Yet, the proposed 300-megawatt project tells a different story. Investment decisions are rarely based on headlines alone. Serious investors examine long-term trends, market demand, available opportunities, and future growth potential. In the case of Burkina Faso, several factors continue to attract attention. First, energy demand remains high and is expected to increase further as the population grows and economic activity expands. For investors in the energy sector, this creates a clear market opportunity. Countries with rising demand often offer significant potential for long-term returns. Second, Burkina Faso possesses considerable economic potential beyond the energy sector. Mining, agriculture, transportation, and manufacturing all require reliable electricity to expand. Investors understand that as these sectors develop, demand for power will continue to rise. Third, many investors are looking beyond short-term challenges and focusing on long-term development strategies. The government's emphasis on economic sovereignty, infrastructure development, and industrial growth has created a vision that some investors find attractive. While every investment carries risks, long-term opportunities can often outweigh immediate concerns. So, the fact that an international investment group has expressed interest in participating in Burkina Faso's energy development sends an important signal. It suggests that confidence still exists in the country's future potential. For supporters of the current administration, this project represents more than a business transaction. They see it as evidence that Burkina Faso can attract capital, technology, and expertise while pursuing its own development priorities. Whether that optimism proves fully justified remains to be seen. But the growing interest from investors is difficult to ignore. To understand why many supporters connect this project to Ibrahim Traore, we must look beyond the power plants themselves and examine the broader vision that has been promoted since he came to power. One of the most consistent themes in Ibrahim Traore's public message has been the idea of economic sovereignty. In simple terms, this means reducing dependence on external actors and building stronger national capacity in key sectors. Energy has always been one of those sectors. So, without reliable electricity, it becomes difficult for a country to industrialize, process its own resources, or create large numbers of sustainable jobs. This is why many observers see energy development as one of the most important pillars of long-term national development. Supporters argue that the proposed 300-megawatt project reflects the type of investment Burkina Faso needs. Rather than focusing only on short-term financial gains, they believe projects that strengthen infrastructure create lasting benefits for future generations. More electricity can support factories, attract businesses, expand public services, and improve living standards across the country. Another important aspect is national image. International discussions about Burkina Faso often focus on security challenges. However, projects like this help present a different narrative. They highlight investment, development, and economic ambition. For many citizens, that shift in perception is significant. The willingness of investors to explore opportunities in Burkina Faso is also viewed by supporters as a sign of confidence in the country's direction. While no single project can transform an economy overnight, major infrastructure investments often signal expectations about future growth. Of course, the ultimate success of any vision depends on results. Power plants must be built, electricity must be delivered, and economic benefits must reach ordinary citizens. Nevertheless, many people see this proposed investment as evidence that Burkina Faso is pursuing a strategy focused on self-reliance, development, and long-term national progress. In that context, the 300-megawatt project becomes more than an energy announcement. It becomes part of a larger story about the future that many Burkinabe hope to build. Despite the optimism surrounding the proposed power plants, not everyone views the project in the same way. As with many major developments in Burkina Faso, some critics remain cautious and continue to raise important questions about the country's economic environment. In Western media and policy circles, several concerns are often mentioned. Critics argue that political uncertainty, security challenges, and infrastructure limitations could make large-scale investments more difficult to implement. Some analysts also question whether announced projects will always be completed on schedule or deliver the expected economic benefits. These concerns are not entirely without merit. Every developing country faces obstacles, and major infrastructure projects always involve financial, technical, and operational risks. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's current direction offer a different perspective. Their first argument is simple. Investors do not commit time, resources, and capital without seeing genuine opportunities. The fact that international investors continue to explore projects in Burkina Faso suggests that they recognize long-term potential despite existing challenges. Second, supporters point out that infrastructure projects should ultimately be judged by results rather than assumptions. If power plants are built, electricity generation increases, and businesses gain access to more reliable energy, the benefits become measurable and difficult to dismiss. Third, many countries that are now considered successful economic examples once faced significant political, economic, or security difficulties of their own. Development is rarely a straight path. Progress often occurs while challenges are still being addressed. A balanced assessment requires acknowledging both viewpoints. Skeptics are correct to ask tough questions about implementation and long-term sustainability. Supporters are equally justified in highlighting tangible investments and visible development efforts. In the end, the real answer will not come from political debates or media narratives. It will come from concrete outcomes. If the project delivers more electricity, more jobs, and more economic activity, its impact will speak for itself. If the two new thermal power plants become reality, the effects could extend far beyond the energy sector. In many developing economies, access to reliable electricity acts as a catalyst that unlocks growth across multiple industries. Burkina Faso could experience a similar transformation. For ordinary citizens, the most immediate benefit would be greater energy stability. Fewer power interruptions can improve daily life, support education, strengthen healthcare services, and help small businesses operate more efficiently. Reliable electricity often creates opportunities that many people take for granted in more developed economies. For businesses, additional power capacity could reduce one of the major obstacles to expansion. Manufacturing facilities, processing plants, commercial centers, and service providers all depend on dependable electricity. As energy availability improves, investors may become more willing to establish operations and expand existing activities within the country. Employment could also receive an important boost. The construction of large infrastructure projects creates jobs directly, while long-term economic growth can generate employment across sectors such as industry, transportation, trade, and services. As new businesses emerge, opportunities for workers may increase as well. The project could also strengthen Burkina Faso's broader development strategy. Reliable energy supports industrialization, encourages value-added production, and helps countries move beyond dependence on exporting raw materials. Instead of sending resources abroad for processing, nations with stronger energy systems can retain more economic value within their own borders. Of course, electricity alone cannot solve every challenge. Success will depend on effective implementation, sound management, and continued investment in complementary sectors. Nevertheless, energy remains one of the most important foundations of development. If these additional 300 megawatts enter service as planned, they could represent far more than an increase in electricity generation. They could become an important step toward a more productive economy, greater investment confidence, and improved opportunities for future generations throughout Burkina Faso. The announcement of 2 new thermal power plants may appear to be a simple infrastructure story, but its implications reach much further. At its core, this project reflects a larger conversation about energy independence, economic development, and the future direction of Burkina Faso. The planned addition of 300 megawatts of electricity capacity has the potential to strengthen 2 of the country's most important cities, support industrial growth, attract new investment, and improve the daily lives of countless citizens. More importantly, it demonstrates that major investors continue to see opportunities in Burkina Faso despite the challenges that often dominate international headlines. Throughout this story, one theme appears repeatedly. Reliable electricity is not merely a utility. It is the foundation upon which modern economies are built. Factories, hospitals, schools, businesses, and public services all depend on stable energy supplies. Without power, development slows. With power, opportunities expand. Supporters of Captain Ibrahim Traore view projects like this as evidence that Burkina Faso is pursuing a path centered on economic sovereignty, infrastructure development, and long-term national progress. Critics may continue to question the pace of implementation or the broader economic environment, but ultimately, the success of the project will be measured by results on the ground. The broader lesson extends beyond Burkina Faso. Across the continent, many nations are seeking ways to transform natural resources into sustainable prosperity. Energy development remains one of the most important keys to that transformation. As discussions about Pan-African cooperation continue, many supporters believe that Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, Pan-Africanism, the African Union, and the vision of a new Africa can play important roles in shaping the continent's future, whether viewed through the lens of investment, development, or national ambition. Ibrahim Traore and Burkina Faso are becoming part of a larger Africa New conversation that many people are watching closely. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join us for more stories about Africa's future and emerging opportunities. Look at the map of West Africa today. Look closely at Mali. Look at Burkina Faso. Look at Niger. Across the Sahel, something extraordinary is happening. Nations that once depended heavily on foreign military partnerships are now attempting to build their own path. They are closing doors that remained open for decades. They are speaking the language of sovereignty, self-reliance, and national control. Then suddenly, another headline appears. While the alliance of Sahel states continues moving toward greater independence, Ghana has signed a historic security and defense partnership with the European Union and accepted a package worth €50 million, approximately $54 million. The package includes surveillance drones, anti-drone technology, intelligence systems, communications equipment, and border security support. For some observers, this is a smart and practical decision designed to strengthen Ghana's security. For others, it raises uncomfortable questions about whether Europe is finding a new foothold in West Africa after losing influence in the Sahel. So what is really happening? Is this a security partnership that will make Ghana stronger, or is it the beginning of a new geopolitical struggle that could reshape the future of West Africa? Today, we will examine the details of the €50 million agreement, explore why the European Union suddenly considers Ghana so important, and ask whether this deal represents protection, partnership, or something much bigger. And if you appreciate honest discussions about Africa's changing political landscape, make sure you follow the channel because the story unfolding today may influence the future of the entire region. The agreement itself immediately attracted attention across Africa. Ghana became the first African nation to establish this type of formal security and defense partnership with the European Union. The support package includes advanced surveillance drones, anti-drone systems, intelligence equipment, electronic warfare capabilities, communication technology, and resources for security forces operating near the northern border. On paper, it looks like a major investment in Ghana's safety, but across West Africa, many people were not simply looking at the equipment. They were looking at the timing. And that timing is what transformed a security agreement into one of the most debated geopolitical developments in the region. The question many Africans are asking today is simple. Why is Europe suddenly so interested in Ghana? To answer that question, we have to look beyond Accra and examine what has happened across the Sahel over the past few years. For decades, Western governments maintained significant security influence in countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Military missions, training programs, intelligence cooperation, and foreign bases became major features of the regional security landscape. The stated objective was clear: fight terrorism, strengthen stability, and support local governments. But something changed. Military transitions took place in all three countries. New leaders emerged. Public frustration grew. Many citizens began questioning whether years of foreign involvement had actually improved security conditions. Instead of seeing progress, many communities continued to face violence, instability, and displacement. As political attitudes shifted, the relationship between the Sahel states and Western powers began to deteriorate. Foreign military forces were asked to leave. Long-standing partnerships weakened. Western influence across the region declined dramatically. This is where Ghana enters the story. Unlike the alliance of Sahel states, Ghana has remained politically stable and continues to maintain strong relationships with international partners. Geographically, it occupies a strategic position along the Gulf of Guinea while sharing regional security concerns connected to instability further north. From a European perspective, Ghana offers something valuable. It is stable, cooperative, and strategically located. Supporters of the new partnership argue that this is simply common sense. If security threats are moving southward, then cooperation should also move southward. They see the agreement as preventive action designed to stop instability before it reaches Ghanaian communities. Critics see a different picture. They argue that after losing influence in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Europe needed a new partner capable of maintaining visibility in the region. In their view, Ghana is not merely receiving assistance, it is becoming an important strategic platform in a changing geopolitical landscape. Whether one agrees with that interpretation or not, one fact remains impossible to ignore. The timing of this partnership has transformed a security agreement into a much larger debate about influence, sovereignty, and the future direction of West Africa. At the center of this controversy is a question that neither supporters nor critics can completely ignore. Does Ghana genuinely need this partnership? The answer is more complicated than many people are willing to admit. Unlike some of the emotional debates taking place online, Ghana faces real security concerns. The northern regions of the country sit close to areas affected by instability in the Sahel. Security experts have repeatedly warned that violent extremist groups operating in neighboring regions could attempt to expand their influence further south. From the perspective of Ghanaian policymakers, preparing for future threats is not optional. It is a responsibility. This is exactly why officials in Accra welcomed the new partnership. Advanced surveillance drones can improve border monitoring, anti-drone systems can help defend sensitive infrastructure, intelligence equipment can strengthen early warning capabilities, communication systems can improve coordination among security forces. Viewed through this lens, the agreement appears practical rather than political. The European Union presents a similar argument. European leaders argue that security challenges no longer stop at national borders. Terrorism, organized crime, cyber threats, and illegal trafficking affect multiple regions simultaneously. According to this view, supporting Ghana contributes to stability across both West Africa and Europe. Yet critics remain skeptical. They point out that security partnerships often involve more than equipment. Modern intelligence systems collect information, surveillance systems generate data, communication networks create access points. The key question becomes who ultimately controls those capabilities. If the technology comes from abroad, who manages upgrades? Who controls technical support? Who has access to sensitive information? Who determines long-term operational standards? These questions do not automatically mean the partnership is harmful, but they explain why many Africans are debating the issue so intensely. The real discussion is no longer about drones or equipment. It is about strategic independence. Can a nation strengthen its security through foreign cooperation while still maintaining complete control over its own future? That question may ultimately determine how history judges Ghana's decision. The debate surrounding Ghana's agreement with the European Union becomes even more interesting when we compare it with the path chosen by the alliance of Sahel states. Today, West Africa appears to be developing two very different visions for its future security architecture. The first vision is represented by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Rather than relying heavily on external military partnerships, these countries are attempting to build collective security through regional cooperation. The Alliance of Sahel States was created with the goal of strengthening military coordination, intelligence sharing, and joint operations among its members. Their leaders argue that African nations must become the primary defenders of African security. Supporters of this approach believe genuine sovereignty requires control over military planning, intelligence gathering, and strategic decision-making. They argue that dependence on foreign security structures can create vulnerabilities that eventually limit national freedom of action. The second vision is represented by Ghana's recent partnership with the European Union. Instead of reducing international cooperation, Ghana has chosen to deepen it. Supporters believe modern security threats are too complex for any country to face alone. Access to advanced technology, training, intelligence support, and financial resources can strengthen national defenses and help prevent future crises. Neither model is entirely without merit. The AES approach offers greater strategic independence, but also requires significant financial resources, military capacity, and long-term political commitment. Building self-sufficient security institutions is a difficult process that may take many years. The Ghana approach provides immediate access to valuable capabilities and expertise. However, critics worry that long-term reliance on external partners could gradually weaken strategic autonomy. This is why the current debate extends far beyond Ghana itself. West Africa is becoming a testing ground for two competing philosophies. One prioritizes self-reliance even when the road is difficult. The other prioritizes partnership even if it raises concerns about dependence. The outcome of this debate may influence how future generations of African leaders define security, sovereignty, and national development throughout the continent. To fully understand why this agreement generated such strong reactions, we must look at the leaders who have come to symbolize the movement for greater sovereignty in the Sahel. No figure has captured more attention in recent years than Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. To his supporters, Traore represents a new generation of African leadership. His message consistently focuses on self-reliance, national dignity, and reducing dependence on external powers. Whether